What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Fitness Stuff for Normal People podcast. I'm Tony, here with my co-host, Mariana. Now, it's no secret that the fitness industry, the one that we're in right now, it sucks. It's not that great. Whether it is the corrupt multi-billion-dollar supplement and weight loss industry or the endless supply of influencers online promoting anything just to drive page views. The bottom line is we're not just trying to provide another fitness podcast here, but completely change the fitness industry for the better. We want to do that by providing you with the knowledge and tools to give you confidence in applying the best possible training and nutrition into your own life. We want to do that today, especially by talking about the buzzword as of late, skinny fat. We're talking about skinny fat today. More specifically, what is it from a body composition standpoint? How do you know if that would categorize you? Then, how does one get to be skinny fat? How do we get there? And most importantly, how do we, I don't want to say fix it, but how do we change that with specific weight training, cardio, and diet techniques we want to give you so you could take this out today if this is something that you're looking to change, to implement into your own programming. And just before we start, I want to be crystal clear. Mariana and I do not love the label skinny fat. It's just easy for this to come off as harmful, rude, hurtful. It's an ugly name, skinny fat, but it does accurately describe a state of body composition that most people refer to it as, and we are massive on communication on this podcast. So we'd rather use a term that more people are familiar with so we could then educate everything around it. Now, the most important steps, or at least one of them, in changing your body composition is to accurately assess where you are starting from. And this term is something that universally is just known of a good starting point. So once we know where you're starting from, you could then be productive in how to change that instead of just throwing darts blindfolded, hoping that something sticks to the board. So today we are going to refer to it as skinny fat, and we're going to talk about what exactly that means down below, but we'll get into that very, very soon. Before Mariana takes over and tells you about the sick stuff we got going on, as always, thank you and shout out to y'all giving us a 5-star review on whatever you listen to. Apple, Spotify, thank y'all so much. We hit over 1,000 on Spotify. We've said that like 5 weeks in a row because we're still freaking excited about it. So thank y'all for doing that. Everybody that takes the time. Mariana, tell them about what we got. What's premium?
We have 1.2K now on Spotify.
Really?
Let's go. Yeah.
1.2. We're never going to stop talking about it. So, and it's because of you guys. So thank you.
All right. And if you really like the research aspect that we bring into each episode, make sure you join us on our premium membership in the Fitness Stuff Research Review, where we dive even deeper into specific studies addressing individual nuances, showing you how to apply each aspect into your own specific lifestyle. And we've got 2 days left of our amazing deal going through the end of January. We're offering 50% off your first month subscription for all those who want to try it out. So just for $5, you can get access to the private premium feed, listen to weekly research reviews, get access to our Ask Me Anything episodes where you can ask us any question you have, and we upvote on the most popular ones and address those each month, which I really love, and get access to special discounts with companies like Examine Plus, Merrick Health, and much more. We don't accept any sponsorship or payment from these companies, which allows us to pass on greater discounts to our subscribers, making some of the best names in health more affordable. You can sign up for our premium research review in the show notes below or at fitnessstuff.supercast.com. Now, a quick note from our sponsor, who we love so much, Legion Athletics, which is going to be actually really, really relevant for this episode. We're going to be talking a lot about the importance of building muscle mass, holding on to that muscle mass later in life, throughout your life. And one of the best, most important ways to do that is by having enough protein. And sometimes that's just not easy to do. Legion Athletics has an incredible whey protein supplement you can get in so many different flavors, and they're so delicious. And it's one of the purest forms of whey protein that you can get on the market, which is why a lot of people see a lot of success with this, especially from a digestion perspective. Personally, are huge fans of their protein and a lot of their other products, so go check them out. We have our link in the show notes below, and you can type in FSPOD at checkout for 20% off your first order or double points on every order after that.
And even more relevant, I know we got the CEO, Mike Matthews, coming on our podcast here in a couple of weeks. I cannot wait to get some inside scoop of what goes on behind the scenes in the supplement industry. That's going to be a fun freaking episode. I cannot wait.
Tony's going to be fangirling.
Oh, for sure. I'm going to be stumbling over my words. It's going to be a hot mess express. As the day goes on, I'm getting nervous
You'll be
the
great.
closer we get. Now, today we're talking about a little skinny fat. This is something that I know I've made a few posts about. I've talked about it quite a bit. I know you've seen it a lot too online, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just living on
Yeah.
these apps. It's like, it's a commonly referred to terms. It gets a lot of, actually, I think the term does, but a lot of people find it helpful. Would you agree?
Yeah. And I get a lot of my clients that come in and say that this is something they want to change. And we'll just say skinny fat. It's just a commonly referred to word. I really don't like the word. I just think it's just terrible because you have both ends of just the spectrum of like skinny and fat. It's just so extreme and it's so in your face. And unfortunately, people will initially see it as a problem. And I think that's something that Tony and I also wanted to clarify up front. We are not positioning this as a problem. If your body composition is so-called skinny fat, that's not a problem. If you have goals related to this type of body composition that you want to change, that is completely individual. And we're here to try to explain how you can do that and what this is, what it means. We're not saying that this is wrong at all. And I just hope that that can be as clear as possible.
Skinny and fat. I wouldn't like to get described as either of those. Like,
it's just also vague.
You can't control the wild beast. That's the internet. I think that's an important note too. This is not something that you need to fix. This episode we wanted to pose because a lot of people would find it helpful to actually figure out how to change this, because it's something that you keep spinning your wheels at. And I think with the common, I would say, advice that social media especially gives to solve for fat loss or solve for building anything else, those typically make the problems that we're going to talk about worse, not better. And I think that's why so many people get frustrated. So on the communication point, I think we start by describing exactly what it is from a body composition standpoint. And when we use the word body composition, it's taking it a step further from body weight, right? Body weight can mean almost anything with that number on the scale. Composition is separating it more into how much of that weight is muscle versus fat. And that's typically what's going to determine aesthetically what you appear like. And again, if you are happy with the way you look and you don't want to change it, you don't have to change it. That's freaking awesome for you. This is more for people actively trying to change appearance, which you can also have an intrinsic kind of motivation to do so. It's not all externally motivated, which I think is important too. So we're talking about body composition. Now, skinny fat describes when someone has a relatively normal body weight. Especially if you look at something like BMI, they would be in the normal body weight category, but they have too little muscle and or a little bit too much body fat that gives them a shapeless, more undefined look. And I think that coined term came from someone saying it's like you look skinny, but you also kind of look fat. And that's why it came as skinny fat, which again, I don't like. I don't like any of it, but it comes down to body composition. Now, I think this is where most cases come from. And we talked about this before the show too. This is so context dependent, where skinny fat doesn't automatically mean one thing with one solution. There can be multiple people that could describe themselves with this composition, but would take multiple different routes to get out of it. And that's what we want to cover today. Now, skinny fat, I think in particular, I don't know what you've seen, but from the most cases I've seen, no matter how low body fat percentage gets, muscle is what generally gives your physique shape. Muscle is what makes you look leaner, more defined, or toned, which is a common goal too. Muscle is the final step that does that. And just by looking at your body right here, there's going to be a layer of body fat that sits over your muscle at all times on all parts of your body. There's going to be body fat above that. Now, there's two ways that you could appear more lean or defined. You could increase your muscle mass or decrease your fat mass. And that relationship is going to determine the silhouette or how lean or defined you look. Now, skinny fat often isn't from having too much body fat. It's from having too little muscle to shine through. So let's say you get your body fat down to a relatively normal or even low body fat percentage. If you don't have any muscle underneath that body fat, you're not going to have any shape or arc or silhouette that's going to give you that look. And so most people try and solve this problem by losing more fat and losing more fat and losing more fat, when that's not the right problem that you should be solving. I think this is a really hard concept for some people, and I hate to generalize, but I notice this very common in women to understand, since the goal is often focused at fat loss or even just weight loss, a number on the scale compared to just muscle gain.
I went through this period for so long being just so resistant to weight training when I was in college. This was also a time when I was just really struggling with food, which needed to be prioritized first. But because it's all these misconceptions of when you're driven by the scale and think that that's the ruler, you don't want to do anything that's going to offset that. And it's just so really based in misconceptions and a lack of understanding. And there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with not knowing. Unfortunately, some people have to go through it and figure it out. But I think that's also why with women and this kind of stigma that even though it's been discussed over and over that weightlifting isn't going to make you bulky, I think it's just rooted in a lot of women's beliefs as we're thrown in our face. It's like, you want to be as thin as possible. This model's doing Pilates or just walking and they're so thin, and you have so many advertisements with just naturally thin people who don't weightlift. And so you think that, hey, I shouldn't be weightlifting because all of the models and influencers aren't doing it. So
even if you do comprehend like that, that weightlifting isn't going to make you bulking, I still think it comes from, like you just said, a lot of the time, like a female centered goal is, what's the number on the scale? That can be the only thing that matters sometimes, which is a silly, silly way to look at it. But even if you're like, okay, I know weightlifting is not going to make me bulky, but my goal is to get that number on the scale as low as possible. I think that's where we want to reshape that a little bit today. Now, before we get into it, I want to answer a pretty, I think, stick out question that not a lot of people ask. And that's, is it unhealthy to be skinny fat? And it's not necessarily unhealthy. And that's why we're saying this isn't a problem that necessarily needs to be fixed, but context, as always, matters. Now, there's two cases in this where you can look at health from just an overall health perspective, if this is your body composition. Now, I think it's important to note someone can be metabolically obese while they're still at a normal or lower body weight. I don't think people fully understand that. And we talk a lot on this show about how just overall lowering your body fat percentage can be a very good thing for overall health. Regardless of how you achieve that, it's going to improve a lot of different symptoms. Now, this means, and what I'm talking about when you can be metabolically obese while at a normal weight, is you can still be at a normal body weight, but still suffer from some of the metabolic markers that tend to be elevated when you are obese or overweight, like insulin resistance, high cholesterol or triglycerides, high blood pressure. You can still suffer from this at a normal body weight, even though you're not overweight and obese. So under that case, and again, it's case by case, if that's you, because you're not living a perfect lifestyle aimed at this, which a lot of the times that skinny fat composition will result from that, you could be in an unhealthy state just based off of that alone. I think that's one important case to look at, right?
Yeah. And I think you can also just extend this out to, you can have any one of these markers, insulin resistance, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, and be very thin. Maybe you need to put on some more muscle mass or whatever it is. You could just have a genetic disposition here that doesn't have anything to do with your weight. There are so many factors that could contribute to these markers. You can extend this out to, I do want to go the next level and kind of understand what's going on in my body, to if I am concerned about health, which everyone really should be, because that can be a better driver for long-term results, because you can't always see these factors. So thinking about this and then extending out to, all right, well, is there anything about my body that may also be related to this? Okay, I know I don't have much muscle mass. I know I hold on to a little bit more fat. Maybe I'm going to start weightlifting, eating a little bit more protein, see if this helps any of this. It's not that, oh, this person looks this way, so obviously their health is wrong. I think that is just a flawed way of thinking. Not a lot of people do that anymore. I think this can just go the extra level of considering multiple factors that you can't always see until you actually start to feel the negative effects of.
1,000%. I was going to say, if you're sitting here and you're like, I don't hate the way I look, but I would want to change something if I'm quote unquote unhealthy in those manners, you could run down. I was going to say, with our partnership with Merrick, we have our own custom blood panel that you can go check, where you get a comprehensive lipid panel. You can check for insulin resistance, HbA1c. You can check for all these different things too. It's worth getting a blood test, in my opinion, if you are someone who's concerned with those markers, even if you appear quote unquote healthy, like you just said, because there's people that lay on either side of that. So that is one aspect of the question. Is it unhealthy to be skinny fat? The other one is, and this is one that I've talked on a lot because I think this matters more than people give it attention to. And that is that overall strength is one of the largest predictors of all-cause mortality. All-cause mortality being death from all causes as you age. Now, with skinny fat usually being tied to having relatively low muscle mass, and muscle mass being directly linked to strength most of the time, this could pose a problem, maybe not right now, but down the road. And a lot of people listening, I think, are in their late teens, 20s, 30s, 40s. Most of those people probably aren't thinking about their life at 50 or 60 sometimes. But we've had a couple conversations on this podcast where there is a massive difference of what life could look the last 10 years of your life. You know, you could live to be 80 years old and you could take two people, but it's like if one of those 80-year-olds for the last 10 years has had to have someone wiping their butt for them versus the 80-year-old who is surfing or hiking or exploring with their family, that's 10 years is almost, it feels like a lifetime. If you could think to where you were 10 years ago, that's something extra you could live at the end of your life. And strength is one of the biggest predictors. Peter Attia he does a ton of extensive research on this. One of the biggest predictors of all-cause mortality. And there's so many reasons for that. And what I wanted to pull in, this is something I think we've mentioned previously, but this was early on when we started the show. It was a really good study that the researchers out of the University of Pittsburgh, and they looked at just directly tying strength when it comes to overall quad strength and grip strength to all-cause mortality, right? Those two simple measures, your lower body strength and your grip strength. And what they did in these groups, and we'll link this down below too, is they separated participants into 4 different groups based on either isometric quad strength and then again separately for grip strength. And they tested these. I'm going to screw up the terms for using these because I have not used these two, but using an isometric dynamometer. Did I nail that or did I nail that? Sounded good enough. So we'll go with it. We'll go with it. But it measures it. So it's not like they just threw some weight on a leg extension machine. It's actually a machine that tests max strength, not just, could you add another plate on or anything like that. But from strongest to least strong, you saw a pretty large drop off with each group and tier that you lowered and lowered strength, all the way up to 40% of an increased risk of all-cause mortality, just purely based on strength. On strength alone, up to 40% increase in risk of all-cause mortality as you age. So is being skinny fat unhealthy? If your metabolic markers right now are fine, it might not be unhealthy now, but if you consider the term health, because it has so many different definitions from like a 30,000 foot up perspective, not carrying significant muscle mass can become a real big problem down the road. And that's just something I think we cover.
That's one of the most important things to take away here. And that's also one of the reasons why I hate that it's labeled skinny fat, because a lot of people will just ignore it as, you know what? And you know what? As a lot of people would, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a common response to, oh, you're labeling something as skinny fat? That sounds just like trash. I don't want to listen to that. But that's this piece of not having much muscle mass is such an important topic to discuss in general. And I really think just because when you're younger, you take a lot of these aspects of health for granted, like being able to get up out of bed and being able to reach off the top shelf and being able to go play with younger kids and do activities. You take that for granted because you're young.
Yeah.
And it's thinking long-term about your health is such an important factor when it comes to whether or not you're going to even maintain any new health habits you have, regardless of what the purpose is. So when people really care about this stuff, I mean, it's why you find people in the longevity space who are they'll go into realms that are just, I don't know how high they're reaching, will reach really high, but the passion is so there and people really care about this. It's so true. There's a large truth to it when it comes to muscle mass and exercise strength training.
I think we use the example of the biggest reason why people get put into assisted living. One of the number one reasons for people getting checked into assisted living is they can't get off the toilets by themselves. They don't have the lower body strength to do 1/2 repetition of a body weight squat, and they need assistance in doing those kind of daily tasks. And not only that, but look at how much and how important muscle is to just recovery from injury. I think a story I've mentioned only once on here before, but like I have a grandmother who is getting up there in age. And I think it was like 7, 8, 9 years ago. She had a simple shoulder injury. I think she fell and injured her shoulder, and she carried very little muscle mass. But since then, she just never had the strength to build up to actually recover. From that last 8 years, She's been suffering from this, and it's just been declining so rapidly. And it's really sad to watch because if their body was more capable when that event happened, that they wouldn't be in the same case that they are today. And it's something that's really, really sad to watch. Now, let's get out of the sappy stuff. Talk about it later in life. It's boring. But you're right. It's mostly viewed as like an aesthetic goal, but it's a lot deeper than that. Now, I did want to touch on context on how to know what route to take, because some people might be carrying more body fat than they think. And I hate to say it, but like the common, how do you know when you should cut or bulk conversation? It comes down to that a lot of the time, because for the most part, we're going to talk about how people become that next, and then these specific tools to get out of it. Now, a solid rule for thumb, and everyone carries body fat differently. Everyone's aesthetic looks different at different body fat percentage. So take this with a grain of salt. But for women, if you're at or below 20% body fat, 20 to 22% body fat, we're in a good place where building muscle makes more sense. Where if you're above 25 to 27%, you should probably look at cutting or a fat loss phase.
That's not cutting down to like 10, 15% body fat. I feel like you hear cut and it's like this intense, insane, like we're trying to get 10% of body fat.
Shredded. Yeah.
It is so not that. It's typically around like that 5% range. Maybe see if we can get down to 20, or it depends. It's a back and forth. It really depends.
We're saying where we should go, because what we're going to talk about is largely one direction. We're not talking about taking it to the extreme. I'm going to step on stage at the Arnold at sub 4% body fat as a guy or something like that. Now, so that was for women. For men, a good way to gauge it is if your body fat is at or below 10%, you're in a good place where building muscle is going to help solve that problem. Or you should probably go on a bulk. If you're above 15 to 17%, that's when a fat loss phase first would make more sense. And again, it would make more sense in certain scenarios than others, where if you have little to no muscle mass, going through a building phase and building muscle is just going to help overall your metabolic output. So it's going to make your cut or fat loss phase easier. Mm-hmm. So even if you're in a place where aesthetically it would make more sense to lower your body fat percentage, that doesn't automatically mean jump on a calorie deficit, jump up the cardio. It doesn't mean that, right? So we want to talk about now the 4 main reasons someone becomes skinny fat, and then we're going to address each of those on how to change it. So the 4 main reasons why someone would end up with this body composition is 1, by having too much cardio in their routine. And then on the other side of that coin, 2, not having enough weight training and heavy weight training in their training routine. 3rd is by severely, or especially over a long period of time, severely restricting their calories. And number 4 would be having much too low a protein intake. Any 4 of those on their own can contribute to this, but most of the time, all 4 of these line up. It's like the perfect storm, where if we say too much cardio, and I wanted to just cover each of those briefly before we go into specifically how we want to change this. If your cardio is dominated by training, right? It's important to know cardio is still phenomenal for your overall health, for your cardiovascular health, for controlling blood pressure. A host of those metabolic markers that we're talking about can be improved through cardio, with a very important aspect of when it's done in the correct amounts. Because I think cardio is one of those things that people will drive, from 0 to 100. They will not try and find a gray area. Too much cardio is going to get in your way and ability to build strength and muscle. That's just a fact. There's a certain point where if you're doing too much cardio, you could be eating the highest protein diet, eating adequate calories, strength training enough. But if you're doing too much cardio, it's going to inhibit yourself from building muscle and strength. So we're going to talk about what that is. And if especially calories and protein aren't lined up right, this can speed up how much muscle you're losing if you're not feeding yourself correctly. So that's only going to make the process worse, or the progress worse.
I was just going to add in a side note, like people often think about, oh, well, runners are so thin. Runners cross train 2 to 3 days a week. Mm-hmm. It is so important. The best runners in the world, doesn't matter how far they're running, cross train. Yeah. It's different. It's a different protocol. It may be not as tense, just risk of injury, but they're still adding in some sort of weight training. I hear that so often. Runners, endurance athletes. Well, what about them? First of all, you're not an endurance athlete, so why are you even comparing yourself to that? I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's rude. Anyway, 2, do you think that they've never stepped foot in a gym in their life? That's also what can separate a lot of the best people, is having the muscle mass to be able to support you, prevent injury risk, help you to have the strength to run for those periods of time. You need muscle around your joints, whatever. It's just an argument that I hate. So I have to add that in there.
The big one, it comes down to also the swimmer's body illusion that James Smith famously covered. A lot of those endurance athletes are there, they don't look like that because that's what they do. They do that because the way they look, it makes it easier for them, which is a big piece too. So we're going to talk about the specific amounts and prescriptions for cardio that we're going to give. But typically, and a good note here is if you want to limit your cardio to less than about a third of your total training time, if your goal is to fix this problem, you don't want cardio taking up even that much, but any more than a third of your total training time, especially if it's not that high. Number two, right? If you're doing too much cardio, that can easily end up with a more skinny fat look or body composition. Now, the flip side of that coin is too little strength. And what I mean by strength training is heavy weight training. I do not count the 5-10 pound dumbbell circuits, the small weights, the small little rubber ones that are cute. Those don't count as heavy weight training. And I know that sometimes people are limited to having only a couple dumbbells in their gym, but it's worth investing in bigger and better equipment because trust me, and I have had this conversation a lot of the times, and again, not to generalize, but with females, it's afraid of the bigger weights, but it's doing squats with like 10 pounds. We need to call
them women, Tony.
What did I call them?
You called them females.
Females, women, females, my girlies.
Women.
I see people doing squats with like 10, 15 pounds. I'm like, look down at your legs. These are massive machines right here. I promise you, they support your body all day. They can squat more than 10 or 15 pounds if you don't have an injury. I promise you. So what I mean by strength training is not just by doing weights. And this isn't talking about like these circuit classes like Orange Theory or F45 when you're not taking any rest. I mean dedicated weight training. Dedicated weight training is what I mean by this. Now we'll talk about the specifics here in a minute, but this is the single best thing you can do to build and maintain muscle. The single biggest and most important step to build and maintain muscle. And that is the root cause of this problem that we're trying to fix, is not having enough of this. So if this piece is missing, even if the rest of the check mark or the boxes are checked, you're going to have a very hard time changing this. You're going to have a very hard time changing this. And we'll talk about exactly what to do, how much to do, how often, all that here in just a little bit. Now, from a training aspect, you got those two sides. Now, from the diet aspect, you have either too low of a calorie intake or too little protein in their diet. And that honestly usually goes hand in hand. If you're severely restricting calories, oftentimes you're not getting an adequate amount of protein. Now, too low of a calorie intake is probably the biggest killer that is leading to skinny fat, especially when you pair it to little or no weight training. Nothing's going to make you lose muscle faster than severely restricting your calories. And I think this is why what we just talked about, when people cut calories even lower and increase their cardio, the problem only gets worse. It doesn't get better. And that's so frustrating because you're like, I need to lose more. You're just focused on creating a calorie deficit as hard as you can. And that just makes the problem worse. So, I mean, good news, we're going to talk about doing the opposite.
I'm not sure if you noticed this, Tony, too, but like these types of behaviors, and this is not like anything wrong with the person. This is what's supposed to happen, but especially these types of behaviors, too little calorie intake, excessive cardio. It's not as a whole too little calorie intake at all, especially with the skinny fat physique. It is, you'll also have these days that you choose to ignore that are excessive calorie intake. So it's not as a whole, you know, we're eating in this extreme deficit. My metabolism is just broken. This is kind of like this yo-yo pattern, especially if you're attaching a lot of cardio, excessive cardio, you're driving that hunger up. And then a lot of people will use cardio to compensate for those days that they're overeating. It's a vicious cycle, but this is often a trend, and it's what's supposed to happen. Like your body is not meant to do these things and last off that little calorie intake, but something to keep in mind and to not ignore those nuances.
It is kind of funny you mention that because they are all usually kind of coupled together. You're not usually just seeing one, but not all of these. They are kind of coupled together in a lot of circumstances. But again, I think this is why it's a commonly shared goal, is because so many people see all of it together. Now, the last step from a dietary perspective is there's just too little protein in your diet. Having too little protein, I mean, protein provides the raw material to build and maintain your muscle. From a dietary perspective, after you get down from energy or calories, once we say, okay, what makes up those calories, this is the most important piece from that aspect. And I think restricting it, one, is going to make it nearly impossible, even if you are weight training, if you're not getting hardly any protein, it's going to be nearly impossible to build and preserve muscle strength in relation to your overall health or aesthetic. But also, especially if you're in a fat loss phase, I mean, just the benefits that protein has for overall satiety, keeping you fuller longer, making adherence or your quote unquote diet seem so much easier than so freaking hard. So those are the 4 usual lead causes of the skinny fat body composition. Now let's talk about how do we change that? How do we get out of that?
If
You're here. Yeah. if you want to. You're here. How do we change that? How do we get a leaner, more defined tone look that most people are striving to? Now, it comes down to 2 main factors, and pretty much what we just talked about. It comes down to 1, your training style and frequency. So how you train, when you train, we'll talk about this here in a second, and your diet from a calorie and a protein perspective for the most part. Now, when it comes to training, the biggest piece here is to focus on heavy compound lifting. Heavy compound lifting. The high rep or pump workouts are usually less effective for building muscle, and they quickly stop working for most people. When you're a newbie and you're obsessed with the pump workouts, the high reps to absolute failure, you're going to get a great pump. And especially if you're a newbie, you're going to build muscle from it. But you typically see a plateau from that when you're ignoring those heavier compound movements. Now, a compound movement, for those unfamiliar as well, is referring to a movement that requires multiple muscle groups. The big compound movements that most people are familiar with are the barbell back squat, conventional deadlift, barbell bench press, barbell row, and the military or overhead barbell press. A lot of barbell going on. Now, I also understand and want to put this caveat, just based on limitations in your body's capabilities, you might not be able to do this. You might not have a gym that's set for this, or we might just be brand new, and I'm not going to recommend throwing a barbell on your back if you've never done a squat before, right? So a compound movement heavy or a regression from these. That's important that a lot of people forget. So what I mean by a regression from these would be if you can't do a full barbell back squat, maybe regress, take a step back to a dumbbell goblet squat. If you can't quite do that, or just because of injury too, you can regress a step further. You can do a leg press, which is on a guided pathway. So you can always regress any of these movements to more and more safer, isolated ways. And you can still do it in a heavy way. Taking a barbell conventional deadlift and regressing it to a sumo deadlift. Not saying that conventional is better than sumo. I want to put that there. Regressing a sumo deadlift into a dumbbell Roman deadlift. Even taking it all the way and regressing it to a 45-degree hyper. Phenomenal movement, a hip hinging movement. You can regress any of these movements, but including these in your program, these multi-muscle group movements at a heavy set, taking close to intensity, is important. So focusing on that is going to be massively important. How often you should be doing this is going to depend on a lot, right? Context matters. But I think for most people, between 3 and 5 days per week is going to be best. And if you're like, well, how do I know? Should I do 3 or 4 or 5 days? What should I do? Assess where you're at right now and take the closest step from there forward. Meaning if you have none of this in your program, start with 3 days a week. If you're already doing 3 or 4 days a week, consider a 5th day per week, right? Just take a step forward from where you are at. Now, we did an episode a long time ago about building a training program where I think we have the most detail on building specifics. But to wrap this one out, your intensity needs to be high, meaning you're using a weight that is within 1 to 3 repetitions of failure, meaning you could not do more than 1 to 3 reps at the weight that you're using at the end of the set. Depending on, again, where you're starting from, how much per week and how do you want to break up your workouts with a split, any way that's going to get you 8 to 20 hard sets per muscle group per week. What I mean by hard sets are those sets taken closer to failure, not warm-up sets, not just throwing around the bar, but those heavy, close to failure sets. And when I say sets per muscle group per week, I realize a lot of people aren't used to that frame of thinking. That's just saying, okay, if I'm talking about my quads, or even let's just say my legs, 8 hard sets per week, meaning in one workout, I could do 3 sets of squats, 2 sets of leg extensions, and 3 sets of leg press. Boom, right there. That's 8 sets during that week. If you're splitting it up multiple sessions per week, you could do 4 sets per day. 4 sets of leg press on Monday, 4 sets of deadlifts on Thursday. Starting at the lower end, and again, same thing with how many days you're doing this. Assess where you're at right now. If you're doing 0 hard sets per week, start with 8. If you're doing 8 to 10, jump to 12 to 15. Take a step forward from where you are right now. That's going to implement progressive overload, which is, I would refer to that episode that we did like a month ago on progressive overload to really fully understand that. But if you're just starting out, don't just jump up to the top of that. Once people start doing only 8 to 10 hard sets per muscle group, they realize a lot of, especially I've seen it on training programs, they start counting their sets and they're like, holy crap, this training program had me doing 40 sets of squats per week or 40 leg movements per week. It's like, and they realize it's way, way too high. And that's what we'd refer to as like junk volume. Have you seen that a lot?
It's disturbing actually how common that is. That also just puts your body at risk for injury and burnout. It creates a shitty relationship with the gym and weightlifting when you think that you have to do that much in order to see success, and you're not even seeing success because it's not optimal for your performance either.
If you're doing 40 sets a week, I would say it's set for the genetic elite. There's zero chance that you're able to do that many sets at the intensity actually needed to see progress. There's no way that you could do that many sets unless you were using too light of weight. And that's going to be the key to the problem. If you try using a higher intensity weight, like I'm talking about, you're going to have a real hard time getting to the upper end of training volume. So that is huge. Now, the flip side of that coin, cardio. Does it have a place? When should you include it, right? That's what you would require from weight training. And this is going to be a little caveat. The best amount of cardio, especially when we're talking about building muscle, the best amount of cardio is as little as needed to reach your goal and maintain health. As little as needed. So it's going to be different for everybody. But like I said, a solid rule of thumb is that no more than 1/3 of your training time should be committed to that. And we'll talk about different ways to implement it, but additional cardio outside of step count, which is usually my favorite way with myself and with clients to increase their quote unquote cardio, right? Is to increase their step count per day. But talking about more adding like HIIT or steady state or anything at the end of a workout, what I mean by 1/3 of your training time is if you're spending 3 hours per week, so 3-hour-long training sessions on weights, don't spend more than an hour of added cardio, meaning 20 minutes of steps after your workout, whatever you want to consider, no more than that. And I'm not saying max that out. I'm saying no more than that, right? The good rule is you want as little as possible in order to reach that goal and maintain your health.
Yeah.
That's an important note. So I think cardio, a lot of times people see as like the silver bullet, and it's not.
Yeah. I mean, to put it in perspective, for strictly just cardiovascular health for adults, it's 60 minutes to 75 minutes of cardiovascular activity. So this could, or exercise. So it could just be walking. It could be any sort of activity. That's anything under the sun per week. So to kind of put that into perspective, if you're doing 3 hours of cardio a week, or if you're doing an hour every single day, that doesn't put you in a better standing, just even from a health standpoint than the next person.
Yeah. And not to take away from cardio at all too, but a lot of people forget that adding in weight training improves your cardiovascular health immensely. Just by simply adding in weight training massively improves that as well. And cardio takes it a step further, but people always say, well, weight training doesn't do this. Yes, it does. It does a phenomenal job at improving your cardiovascular health. And I think the best ways, as you're going to notice, we're taking is take a step forward from where you are. So I think our shared favorite ways to implement cardio is through your daily step count. It doesn't increase your hunger, so you're not going to be even more hungry than you already were. Very low impact, very low risk of injury. You can do it 7 days a week. That doesn't just automatically mean jump to 10,000 steps.
Yeah.
Right? If you're at 5,000 steps, let's see if we can do a couple weeks at 7. If you're at 7, let's see if we can do a couple weeks at 8 or 9. Take a step forward from where you are. Don't just try and hit this like quote unquote perfect number that people subscribe on social media, like 10,000 steps a day or X amount of whatever. That's common. You're different and you need different guidelines. Now, side note too on HIIT, a lot of common things, because I actually do enjoy high intensity interval training at the end, just because I like to shorten the duration of my workouts. Just a caveat, that is not a bet. There's no way, shape, or form that this is better at fat loss than steady state or at walking or at anything else. HIIT does not have any magical properties. It's just a quicker way to achieve calorie burn, since it's usually at a higher intensity. And for some people, motivation wise, it's just more fun to do those higher intensity things that are broken up instead of walking. It's not magic, but it's still a good way to add it in.
Oh my God, that's what got me through being quarantined. I just wanted to get it done. I enjoy it, but I'm not trying to go walk for 2 hours. There's so many ways to switch it up too. If you are in a position where you have limited access to equipment, even if you get just the way you can switch it up and make it exciting.
No, I'm with you. And a lot of people, just from a motivation standpoint, it's just so much easier sometimes if you're switching things every 30 to 90 seconds versus doing the same thing for 20, 30, 40, whatever minutes at a time. My brain goes absolutely insane. Now, that is the basics from a training perspective, where you want to put your training with weights and cardio. From the diet perspective, the two big things we're going to cover are protein and calories. Protein, calories. Now, depending on where you are starting from, like we covered earlier, you may need to focus on building muscle first. You may need to focus on losing fat. In the most case here, you would be focused on building muscle. This is the most common thing that you want to achieve. Now, the word bulk, again, not a big fan.
Sucks. Who made these? Can we have a conversation with whoever coined all these terms?
We need better terms. But bulk or building muscle, there's an important distinction. And I think we had an episode earlier on how to lean bulk. That's the term I want to use, because there's a big difference between just dirty bulk, and lean bulk, where a lean bulk or a muscle building phase is what I would like to call it, is where the goal is to build and increase muscle mass while limiting how much body fat you store, right? That is the goal of a bulk. How a lot of people take it is, I'm going to eat as much food as possible while lifting weights. So yeah, I'm going to increase my muscle, but I'm also going to increase my fat storages really, really fast. And where your calories want to be, if you're at a place where you're setting and paying attention to calories, is for a surplus of no more than 10%, is if you're trying to build muscle. A surplus of no more than 10%. And when we talk about setting a calorie deficit, I would say no more than like 25 or 30% in certain scenarios of a calorie deficit. And it's like, well, why are those numbers so starkly different? It's like, because your body can only build muscle at a certain rate. You can't build muscle at the same rate that you can lose fat. That's very, very important to note, because muscle building takes longer periods of time. And I do want to cover an important note of how to track progress, because if you are skinny fat, if you have that body composition and you want to change it, it's very hard to keep yourself motivated, because the scale's not going to change a massive amount. And you're going to need positive reinforcement to show that what you're doing is working. You're going to need that if you have any hopes of keeping it. Because guess what? You can't fix this in a month. You can't fix this in 2 months. It's going to take months to a year plus, depending on where you're starting from. And I think expectation wise, you need to know that going in. You can't just fix this. And anyone selling you that is doing just that. They're selling you something on that. That's not going to work. So setting specific goals and how you want to measure your progress to make sure, hey, what I'm doing is working. I got to stick to this plan. I think, and tell me if you have any other better ways to do this, please track your workouts and your strength, because if you can guarantee, and I would say setting more weight and exercise specific goals. So wanting to squat a certain weight, if your squat is at 135 pounds, setting the goal of hitting 155 pounds is one of the best goals you can do, because the only way you're going to be able to increase your squat is by getting stronger or by building muscle. That's the only way you can do those things. So setting and finding those movements that you love. If it's bench, if it's squat, if it's a deadlift, if it's a row, if it's a machine, set a goal. Really see where you're at strength-wise when you max out, and set a specific goal to get stronger there, because that's how you're going to guarantee, and that's going to keep you motivated and keep doing it. Because again, you're not going to see the scale change that much. You're not going to see, your composition doesn't change on a day-to-day basis. If you look in the mirror, you're going to have good days and bad days. So setting strength goals, I think, is one of the most underrated but most important aspects of getting out of this situation. Would you agree?
I would say so, because especially it's very easy to get in your own head and feel like you haven't made progress. It's very easy to do. If you're not having a specific tracker that you can lean on and be like, this is what I'm relying on, this is what I could fall back on, this is what's going to help me remind myself you're on the right track here. It's so easy to psych yourself out and think that you're taking steps backwards, because especially while you're bulking.
Yeah.
Because people just automatically think that that means that they're undoing any progress they've already made, which is so not the case.
Yeah, exactly. So doing that, I know it's easy because we're coaches, so we use a technology called Trainerize that estimates and tracks all of our clients' strength and increases and graphs it out. So it's really nice and visual. If you don't do that, you can either use, I think, your Notes app, or Stacked is another great free app. I think actually this is crazy because it's not linked to this in any way. I think Mike Matthews made that app like 10 years ago. And it's just a free app. I know it doesn't have anything about him, which is hilarious, but it's free on the App Store and you can track your workouts in a really easy visual way. And I promise you, I know it seems trivial because you've been focused on getting a lower number on the scale or anything else. That is going to be so much more motivational for you because as you increase strength, you're going to know it's working. Now, what I mean, I want to just give an example of increasing to a calorie surplus of 10%. What does that exactly mean? That means find your TDEE, or how many calories that you burn in a day. You can do that by just Google the term TDEE calculator and click on the first link. That gives you a rough estimate if you don't have a confident answer through tracking your nutrition and your weight. Let's say that your total daily energy expenditure, how much you burn, is 2,400 calories, so 2,400. A 10% surplus would mean increasing your calorie intake by 10% of that. So 10% of 2,400 is 240. So that would mean if you're trying to lean bulk, you would be eating 10% more than you're burning, which is about 2,650 calories a day, right? That's a good place to start. Now, as a red flag, and this is something where I think daily weigh-ins, if you're at a good place for this, is still very important, because you want to make sure as you're building muscle that you're not storing so much fat to where once you get to the end point, you've got so much fat to lose that it didn't really make a difference in the first place. For men, if you're gaining more than 2 to 3 pounds a month, and this is after the first month of a new routine because you see so much weight fluctuation from water weight. After the first month, if you're gaining more than 2 to 3 pounds a month, I would pump the brakes and slow down a little bit, because somewhere in your diet, you're taking in too many calories, and anything above that is probably being stored as body fat. For women, it's a little bit less. I think anything more than 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds a month is where you want to be for this. And again, your weight's going to fluctuate multiple pounds a day. That's why daily weigh-ins and taking averages is so important. But those are some little red flags along with setting strength goals that you just want to pay attention to make sure that you're moving in the right direction. Because again, this isn't going to take a couple weeks or a month. It's going to take some time. So I did want to give those as we go out. And that leads us to the final point, some protein. I think the simplest thing, and we could go anything through this, and it's not as, I think, exact as you need to be, because we're talking 10% of a calorie. So that's very specific. I'm going to link that protein calculator that we mentioned down below, because ideally you just want to aim for about 0.8 to 1.2 grams of protein per pound. And this is what the calculator is going to give you of lean body mass. So not just body weight, but lean body mass. So weight coming outside of fat. An example of this, meaning if you weigh 200 pounds and you're 20% body fat, that would mean that 20% of you is body fat. So 160 pounds is lean body mass. That's the number you would use for that calculation. Or honestly, an easier rule of thumb is you could just aim for most people, unless you're very obese, which then you wouldn't be in the position that you'd want to fix skinny fat. You'd want to go through a fat loss phase, is 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight for most people is going to be a good rule of thumb. Getting in that direction, we'll link the calculator below too, going to be a solid place for most people to be from a protein perspective to get what they need to build, to maintain, and to change their composition. And I think that is a good enough, specific enough route to exit. What do you think?
It's really important. I think we always say this with any episode like this, that people could just completely take the wrong way. And it's fair. I mean, we mentioned we're not the biggest fans of this term, but not everyone's going to have this goal. If that's the case, like, you probably haven't even listened this far. But hopefully this did help people who can see past that name and actually really do have these goals and have these goals for the right reasons and feel like they can accomplish them, just didn't have the right tools or understanding to be able to. Hopefully we reach those people, and now you do. What I love about Tony, and I even learn so much from him all the time, is that it's really applicable. So hopefully you can take some of these, listen back to them, and start to apply them, even if it's just one new step, one new thing you learned, not everything at once. Maybe you want to start from the dietary protein aspect. Maybe you want to start from just adding in some weightlifting.
Yes.
Don't try and do all of it right away.
Yeah, because you will fall on your face. We'll be there to catch you. But you're going to fall on your face. So that's an important note. And obviously, as you're going through this on your own, reality is different than this map that we provided you. So you're going to encounter things that we didn't talk about. You're going to encounter things that no one else encounters. You're going to have to adapt and make changes, but you just got to do it. Ain't nothing to it but to do it. So get in there, get started. Ain't nothing to it but to do it. But that's what we all got rolling on today. So hopefully y'all enjoyed this episode. I know it was highly requested. We're going to pump this out a few more days on the research review. So jump on that deal if you can. It's only $5. And that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Fitness Stuff for Normal People.
As always, you know where to find us, fs.pod on Instagram and TikTok, and Fitness Stuff for Normal People on YouTube. For more evidence-based content from Tony and I, make sure to check out our research review, available on Fitness Stuff Premium every Friday, linked in the show notes below.
And we hope this made your Monday suck a little bit less and the fitness industry a little bit more bearable. We'll see you guys next week.